Hello and welcome to Roundtable. No one puts their children in a boat unless the water is safer than the land. The words of Somali British poet Wasan Shire, explaining why some migrants flee to escape conflict and insecurity. However, with migrants dying at sea every day, is it worth the risk? Just last month, 27 migrants died attempting to cross the English Channel in a dangerous and unseaworthy boat. Despite the hand-wringing, the UK and France have blamed one another for the deaths. So who is responsible for migrants in Europe's waters? Very good to have your company. I'm David Foster. You know, this year, record numbers of migrants have crossed the English Channel and the Mediterranean Sea from Africa to Spain and to southern Italy. Well, now Europe is making it tougher for migrants to reach its shores. The UK has introduced a new nationality and borders bill that would criminalise anyone helping them on their journey, even if it meant saving lives at sea. French police evicted migrants from a camp on the English Channel's coast, and thousands remain stuck in Spain's Canary Islands. So what is the safest route for migrants? Under new rules proposed by the European Union, member states could introduce border checks whenever they wanted and extend those checks indefinitely. This could erode the EU's borderless model and affect the movement of migrants across the bloc. Is the EU a roadblock to safe migration? According to the United Nations Refugee Agency, almost 21,000 arrived on the Canary Islands this year. That's more than double last year's total. French authorities report more than 31,000 migrants attempted to cross the English Channel, and 7,800 were rescued this year. According to the International Organization for Migration, almost 5,000 migrants died globally in 2021. This past Saturday marked International Migrants' Day, drawing attention to governments' obligations towards those people on the move. Well, let us say hello to Gulwali Passarlay, welcoming him back to the programme. He's in Sussex in the UK, and he made it from Afghanistan to the United Kingdom as a 12-year-old boy. It is a terrifying story. We'll hear more about what happened to him after he arrived in the UK in just a moment. We say hello to Beppe Caccia, Head of Operations at Mediterranea, Saving Humans. He's on his rescue boat, the Mare Jonio, in Venice. And in London, we have Don Flynn, former director of the Migrants Rights Network. Beppe, I want to come to you first of all. Back in May of 2019, you rescued some migrants who were floundering off the coast of Libya, among them a couple of pregnant women, 2-year-old girl, unaccompanied minors, and you faced prosecution in Italy. I know the charges have now been dropped, but why did they say you were being taken to court?
Our case was only a part of a wider process of criminalization of civil sea rescue at sea in the Mediterranean. During the last few years, Italian offices of public prosecutors opened more than 20 investigations against humanitarian activities at sea, considering the civil rescue operation as favorizing and bidding illegal immigration to Italy. Of course, no one of our operation is criminal, but we only follow our duties and we strictly follow the international and national maritime law, and it's compulsory for us, as for everybody at sea, to safeguard the human life at sea. And it is exactly what we are doing daily, different organizations in the central Mediterranean area.
What do you think would have happened to these people who you took, I believe, to the island of Lampedusa? What do you think would have happened if you hadn't rescued them?
But it's clear that if in May 2019 we were not at sea and we were not able to rescue them, sure they would have been died. Because of weather conditions, because of sea condition, because of the conditions of these boats, dinghies or wooden boats that are totally unable to sail out in safe conditions. This is the reason why we are strongly claiming that European navies and Coast Guard are to come back in the Mediterranean and to develop a new huge search and rescue operation. In the same time, we are claiming a humanitarian evacuation from Libya, from the horrible conditions of the detention camps in Libya. And third, above all, we think that it will be necessary that European Union member states would set up safe and legal passages in order to allow people entering in safe conditions and fully legal conditions into the European borders.
I'm going to come back and ask you in a little while what you thought, knowing the work that you do, when you saw that those 27 poor people had died in the English Channel within the last few weeks. But I want to hear, first of all, from two migrants, one of whom made it to the Canary Islands and another one of whom is, I think, in Calais, northern France, waiting, hoping to get to the UK.
I sat there and waited for death to arrive. There were a lot of people dying, so we just sat and waited for death. Some people were crazy and threw them to the water. But we just sat. If we died, then we died in the boat. We didn't throw people into the sea.
I did 2 years journey, and I knew where I go it will be not better, because the closest I was coming to Europe, the more I get disappointed, because when I was in my way, I was expected too much empathy, humanity here in Europe. But unfortunately, as a refugee, when you don't have documents in first, it's so difficult.
So I'll come back to you, Beppe, in just a moment, if I may, but I want to bring in Gulwali at this point. When that second refugee, second migrant, says he was expecting too much, perhaps, was that something that you encountered when you came to the United Kingdom?
Hi, I don't think it's too much. It's just a human thing to expect empathy and solidarity. I don't think he meant, not too much. Maybe he was disappointed because of that, but actually, asking for some empathy and understanding is the normal thing to do. When I go to the UK, actually, I had expectations of being treated humanely, but unfortunately, I was faced with hostility, deterrent policies, and I was treated as a criminal, not so much by the people, but by the government. So the people were, actually, I was valued by the people, but not so much by the system and the establishment.
Given all of those difficulties and the fact that people are still trying to do it, and sometimes some of them are dying, would you tell those who want to make the crossings it just isn't worth it?
Actually, David, we saw recently 27 people dying and losing their lives, not because they wanted safety and protection, which was their human rights, and actually they were filled by the French and the UK government. People die because of the hostile environment policies, because of the deterrent policies. So it's difficult for me to tell people not to make these journeys, because what is the alternative? So people make the journey, and I just hope they make it, I hope they think about these risks, and I hope they could find alternatives. But unfortunately, there aren't many alternatives when it comes to safer and legal routes or comes to humanitarian visas for these people.
Well, can I just say this? There are alternatives, because you don't have to come to the UK. You could stop in the first European country in which you arrived. You wouldn't have to make a dangerous sea crossing. You could minimise the risks.
Because this argument, no, David, this argument doesn't make sense. Look, basically, the international system is based in a way, it does not say you have to stay in the first safe country, because that would not be fair and wouldn't make sense on countries like Turkey or Greece or other states. So basically, where you go, it's about where you feel safe, where you feel belong. This idea that people shouldn't have to make the journey from France to the UK is bizarre. It doesn't make sense. It's illogical. So because we're the furthest in Europe, so well, everyone should stay in other countries. Actually, France takes more asylum seekers than the UK. Germany takes 7 times more. And no, Italy, Spain, Greece, Sweden, they have all do more. They had do more than we do. So I feel like this argument that people should stay because they're not our problem, they should go anywhere but the UK doesn't.
It wasn't so much
inhumane.
Gulwali, I wasn't suggesting they should stay. I was saying they could stay and not risk their lives. I understand what you're saying.
Most people do stay. No, most people do stay, but some people decide to go because they have links to the UK and they don't feel safe in France. I didn't feel safe in Calais when I was there 14 years ago.
Okay, I understand your point. Very well made. Don, let me come to you. How much more difficult is it for a migrant now compared to, let us say, 50 years ago at the beginning of the establishment of what has now become the European Union? Was it much more easy then or not?
It's changed considerably over the years. I mean, I'd say when I started doing immigration work back in the 1970s, at that point, the immigration rules were certainly a lot simpler. They were basically a little slim pamphlet that anybody could read, they could interpret freely for themselves, and giving people advice about what the system was for obtaining visas, the conditions that had to be met was a great deal easier. Nowadays, in the case of the UK, the immigration rules actually go into volumes. And on top of that, there's explanatory volumes that are added to it. And there is huge cost associated with it as well. Visas often cost hundreds of pounds and even thousands of pounds in some categories. So right from the onset, it's a hostile set of circumstances.
But let me put this to you. We are sometimes told that the world is the safest it has ever been. I know there are terrible events happening all over the globe, but we are told that in terms of conflict and the deaths of people in terrible circumstances, we are at the safest, believe it or not, point in humankind's history. Therefore, in a sense, it makes no sense for more and more people to be trying to escape their own countries to come to the UK or to France or to Belgium or southern Italy or wherever. Why are they doing it?
Well, because the people who are coming, I mean, if we look at the countries that they come from, it's a relatively small number. And they are amongst the countries where it's not possible to say that life has become safer for them. There is persecution. They come from authoritarian regimes. There are militaries, militia who are fighting it out amongst themselves.
But I'm thinking about the pull factor. Why wasn't that the case 50, 60 years ago? Why are they being pulled towards external borders now when they weren't necessarily then, when, as you suggest, it might have been more dangerous?
Well, there are a couple of reasons. One of them was that the Cold War system was actually a good system for containing people in countries where authoritarian regimes operated. It was very, very difficult. There were efficient bureaucracies with walls that prevented people from escaping. Since now, it's no accident that the refugee figures started going up after 1989 when the Berlin Wall came down and the system in Eastern Europe fell apart. Because the borders became more open, more fluid, more porous at that time. And it was possible to envisage escape from circumstances where people were being persecuted. But I think also in addition to that, I mean, it is not just violence that people are escaping from. It is poverty as well. And poverty is another type of violence. Poverty is something which places severe restrictions on people's lives. And they are.
That's economic migration, though, isn't it?
Well, you know, there is no Chinese wall between economic migration and refugee migration. This is something that I think we're particularly having to understand nowadays in the context of a new form of migration that everybody's talking about, which is climate change migration. You know, people experience poverty as an oppressive condition. They feel it. They see their opportunities for being able to enter into labour markets where they're going to have a chance of a decent life are being restricted. The regimes that police those type of labour markets are often oppressive. They're corrupt, and it is another form of oppression. And
okay, I'm going to come back in a little bit, Don, and ask you about the new restrictions that are being put in place. But first, let's hear from the Catholic Pope, Pope Francis, on people exploiting migrants.
It is easy to stir up public opinion by instilling fear of others. Yet why do we fail to speak with equal vehemence about the exploitation of the poor, about seldom mentioned but often well-financed wars, about economic agreements where the people have to pay, about covert deals to traffic in arms, favoring the proliferation of the arms trade? The remote causes should be attacked, not the poor people who pay the consequences and are even used for political propaganda.
So, Beppe, there we have the Catholic Pope saying these people are being exploited. In what sense do you see that from where you are, on board your boat, perhaps waiting to go out and rescue some more migrants?
I think that the words of Pope Francis in the island of Lesbos were very clear and loud with his voice. And the discourse in Lesbos was, above all, a discourse against walls. In a general consideration, we see that there are people on the move all around the world. But if we look at the concrete situation in the central Mediterranean, with people coming from Libya, we can see that, as Don said, there is no sense of distinction between economic, climatic, or other reasons to migrate. In the case of people trying to cross the Mediterranean from Libya, we can see that the reason to leave their own countries can be very different, but then there is a more specific pull factor that is the horrible conditions of living in Libya, particularly for those migrants that are entrapped and exploited in the detention camps. Abuses, violences, tortures, rapes are the daily bread of migrants in Libya, and this is the main reason why they accept even dangerous conditions in order to cross the sea.
I'm going to ask you when we come back, Beppe, in just a couple of minutes after I've spoken to the others, about what you think you might be required to do next on board your vessel, an old tugboat that's been in use for a number of years doing this sort of work. But let's hear, before I come to you, Gulwali, from the French president.
The first theme of this presidency is a more sovereign Europe. A sovereign Europe, for me, has the foremost aspect of being capable to keep its borders under control. We've seen it again in the last couple of weeks, with the crisis we have experienced at Europe's eastern borders, at the Liechtenstein and the Latvian border from late summer, then at the Polish border.
So my question to you, Gulwali, is do you think it is going to be much more difficult nowadays, given the current climate, given the fact that Macron is saying strengthen external borders, given the fact that the UK is bringing in these new laws? Is it going to be much more difficult for somebody to do what you did and reach safety and a life with so much promise?
David, that's a really good question. So basically, my journey wasn't really easy. It was 12,000 miles. It took me a year at the age of 12, 13. So now it's going to be even more harder. This emphasis on borders and protecting borders rather than protecting people is really wrong. And I think, and again, I agree with Pope Francis, what he says when migrants have been exploited for political reasons. And actually, these guys are not even migrants. These are refugees and asylum seekers. You know, most of them, almost 98% applies for asylum when they reach their destination's country. So I think France and Britain has been working on these deterrent policies of building walls and securitization. I mean, Britain spent over 200 million in recent years in the securitization in Calais. And that's why we see people crossing in small boats. So I don't think the journey will, of course, become more difficult, but the problems of the world is not going away. About 5 years ago, there were about 50 million displaced people. Now there are 80 million displaced people. There used to be 5 years ago 20 million refugees. Now that is over 30 million refugees. So the issues we see in Afghanistan, the Afghan state and the people were abandoned and betrayed by the Western world. And now we don't want to take it was when Afghanistan fell to the Taliban. He was like, well, we need to make sure these Afghans don't get here. And we see, Turkey has built a wall with Iran. Greece has built a wall with Turkey. Bulgaria has built a wall with Turkey. And then, we see Hungary now with the situation on the Polish and Belarus border. So everywhere walls have been built, but very few bridges. And I think, we have a moral and legal obligation to people, particularly these Afghans, Syrians, Iraqis, people fleeing from war zones and conflict areas, which we had a lot to do with it. These Afghans will not be fleeing for their lives if Britain and America acted differently and did not, basically treated the Taliban as a government.
Acted differently in what way?
If they had not allowed the Taliban to take over the country. The US was very comfortable and allowed the Taliban to take over the country.
It all comes back to that. But I'm wondering about acting differently in terms of, let's leave America out of this because this program is about Europe. I'm thinking about acting differently in terms of their approach to refugees and migrants.
Yes, I think they need to do more. They need to approach it humanely. They need to approach it from a humanitarian angle, from a compassionate angle. At the moment, there's a crisis of empathy and compassion. I think Europe could really manage these people. There are not many people coming. In 2015, we saw 1 million people entering. That number has been decreasing every year by year, but the issues of the world has not. And I mean, Turkey last year actually deported 250,000 Afghans. Iran plans to send Afghans back, even though the country is, in the worst humanitarian crisis
Can I go to Don? Sorry, Gulwali, sure. I want to go to Don. We've only got a limited amount of time. The UK Nationality and Borders Bill, what Macron is saying about tightening up within Europe, it's going to become more difficult for migrants and refugees, which presumably is what both the United Kingdom wants and many countries in Europe say they want.
Yes, that's certainly the case. I mean, I think we're still in the process of building a hostile environment, which, it became a matter of public debate and public discussion just a couple of years ago in relation to long-established migrant communities in the UK, people who've been living here for 40 or 50 years, the so-called Windrush generation. But we haven't pulled back from that idea of a hostile environment. It's always being extended. The idea that the rules and regulations that govern the movement of people across borders are becoming increasingly complex, more difficult, more expensive for people to use, yet the need to move remains the same. So we're going to be seeing the building up of pressure as people try to navigate these borders. And I don't believe they're going to go away simply because they've become more formidable. They're not going to go away for that reason, because the driving force for migration remains the same. Poverty, inequality, oppression, that remains the same.
Beppe, you are on board your vessel. You are in waters very close to Venice. You will be going out into open waters, I think, very, very soon. Give us an idea of what you experience. And I know each trip is different, but what you experience over a period of time. What are you likely to find out there?
It's clear that our most relevant desire is to stop our operations. To stop our operation in the day when the European Union and single national states migration policies will change. Nobody can consider the limited amount of migrants and refugees climbing to enter Europe as a problem. There is no invasion, as called in some racist propaganda in European public opinion. We think that Europe, including the UK, could manage in a very fair way people arriving within their borders. So the solution we are strongly pushing for is finally to open safe and legal opportunity to enter the border for Europe for the people willing to do that. This is possible, and this is not only the most human solution, but also the more realistic one.
Okay, well, we wish you, your crew, and those people you're trying to rescue towards the Mare Jonio, your vessel, all the very best. Of course, temperatures are dropping all of the time and the seas are becoming rougher. It becomes much more difficult both for you and the people in the small boats. Thank you, Beppe. Beppe Caccia, thank you very much indeed. Don, we appreciate you coming on. And Gulwali, great to see you again. I noticed on your website, and all they have to do is type in your name and they'll find the work you're doing. You've written something like this: I've become a lot more lazy and I complain about everything. When I was younger, I didn't complain. I just got my head down and kept on trying, which is why you were able to do that 12-month journey as a 12-year-old, more than 1,000 miles across Europe. And it just remains for me, David Foster, to say thank you to you, wherever you happen to be watching this edition of Roundtable. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your interest. And we'd love to welcome you along on another occasion. Until then, goodbye.